Welcome to the Right News Network.
Welcome to your World News Update. I'm Emma, bringing you today's top stories from around the globe. The Trump administration's message on the Iran conflict keeps shifting. We're now 10 weeks into a costly war with no clear end in sight. Our Middle East correspondent, Layla Nazari, has this. Layla?
Well, Emma, what's happening here is we're seeing real contradictions coming from the White House. Just this week, Trump told Congress hostilities have essentially terminated. But then on Sunday, he's posting on Truth Social that Iran hasn't paid a big enough price yet. I mean, you can't really have it both ways. Either the fighting's over or it's not.
So what's actually happening on the ground right now between Israel and Hezbollah?
Look, the exchanges are still very active. We're seeing regular strikes, counterstrikes, no real momentum towards stopping. And here's the thing, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets economically. Energy prices are climbing, markets are nervous, and Trump's original promise of a quick, cheap conflict, that's just evaporating. The 10th week is stretching into who knows how long.
Layla, appreciate it. Continuing on world affairs, OPEC Plus is facing its deepest internal crisis in years, just as a military standoff threatens one of the planet's most critical oil choke points. And still with us is our Middle East correspondent, Layla Nazari. Layla, what's the latest on how these crises are colliding?
Well, Emma, so what we're seeing is OPEC Plus trying to put on a brave face. 7 member countries just agreed to add 188,000 barrels per day to their quota starting in June. But here's the thing, that's really a drop in the bucket. It's less than 1/5 of 1% of global demand. And they're doing this right after the UAE just walked out of the organization on Friday. So they're essentially saying, don't worry, we're still unified, when clearly they're not.
But at the same time, there's this separate crisis brewing in the Strait of Hormuz, right?
Exactly. Look, the U.S. Navy has been dealing with Iranian mine threats since late February after American and Israeli strikes on Iran. And now the Pentagon is saying it could take up to 6 months just to clear those mines out of the shipping lanes. So you've got a fractured oil cartel on one side and a potentially blocked waterway on the other. That's a perfect storm for energy prices.
Layla, appreciate it. The Trump administration is pulling 5,000 American troops out of Germany, the latest move in an escalating clash between the president and German Chancellor Merz over defense spending and Iran policy. Trump says more troops could follow this initial withdrawal from a country that hosts roughly 10,000 U.S. forces. Watch for NATO's response and whether other European allies reconsider their security posture. Also on the world front, Israel has approved a massive defense purchase that could reshape military capabilities across the Middle East. The deal includes advanced F-35 and F-15IA fighter jets from U.S. manufacturers worth tens of billions of dollars. 2 new combat squadrons are expected to strengthen Israeli air superiority significantly in coming years. Tensions in the Middle East are escalating as Iran and the United States exchange competing visions for regional stability. Iran has now submitted a 14-point response to the U.S. proposal, but the core disagreement remains unresolved. The Trump administration is maintaining a naval blockade while Iran continues to keep the Strait of Hormuz, critical to global oil supplies, effectively closed. Watch for further diplomatic movements in the coming weeks, as both sides navigate whether compromise is possible. Remaining with world affairs, tensions between the U.S. and Iran remain high with major implications for global stability and oil markets. President Trump is reviewing a new Iranian peace proposal with 14 points, but he says Tehran hasn't paid a sufficient price to make a deal worthwhile. Watch for Trump's formal response in the coming days. He's left open the possibility of escalating military action. Continuing on world affairs, the escalating violence in Lebanon and Gaza is threatening fragile ceasefire negotiations and devastating border communities. Israeli forces have conducted 50 airstrikes in southern Lebanon in the past 24 hours, killing at least 13 people, while 2 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since dawn, bringing the total toll to at least 20 in a single day. Medical personnel are increasingly targeted, with 4 paramedics wounded in one attack, crippling emergency response systems when they're needed most. There's a shadow network operating right now, smuggling Starlink satellite internet terminals into Iran to beat government-imposed blackouts. A man named Sahan tells the BBC he's sending these devices to help Iranians see what he calls the real picture during times when authorities cut off the internet. It's a high-stakes operation with major implications for free information in one of the world's most tightly controlled digital environments. The European Union is pushing back hard against plans from Donald Trump to slap new tariffs on vehicles coming into the United States. This is shaping up as one of the first major trade conflicts of his incoming administration. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more. Marcus?
Well, Emma, this is moving fast. The EU's trade chief came out swinging today, calling Trump's vehicle tariff proposal unacceptable and making it pretty clear that Brussels isn't going to roll over here. We're talking about billions in auto exports. German companies like BMW and VW send hundreds of thousands of cars to America every year. So this isn't some minor trade spat. This is real money.
And what's Trump's argument for why he wants to do this?
Look, it's the same playbook he's run before. He's arguing that the U.S. has an unfair trade deficit with Europe, that tariffs will protect American manufacturers and bring jobs back home. His team says the current deals don't work for America. But here's the thing. Most mainstream economists actually disagree with that analysis. That said, it plays really well with his base, which is why he keeps hammering it.
What happens if the EU retaliates?
Then you're looking at a real trade war. The EU's already signaling they'll hit back through the WTO and target American agriculture and tech exports, sectors where U.S. companies do really well in Europe. It could get messy fast. Both sides are talking tough right now, but there's probably room for negotiation down the road if cooler heads prevail.
Marcus, appreciate it. Moving to science now. Researchers have discovered that 2 of the West Coast's most dangerous fault systems, the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas fault, may be connected in ways that could trigger multiple major earthquakes within hours of each other. Instead of one massive quake, the region could face simultaneous seismic events across multiple states. Scientists are now racing to understand how often this synchronization could occur and what it means for millions of residents living in earthquake zones.
Now, our in-depth analysis of the day, the story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle.
We are watching one of the most dangerous standoffs of the 21st century reach a genuine breaking point. Iran's senior military brass are openly warning that renewed conflict with the United States is, in their words, likely, and they've made clear they're fully prepared for American foolishness after President Trump rejected Tehran's latest nuclear proposal and signaled military options are firmly on the table. Trump, for his part, says Iran hasn't paid a big enough price for 47 years of aggression. The stakes here couldn't be higher. Nuclear capability, regional war, and America's credibility as a superpower all hanging in the balance at once. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is Trump's rejection of Iran's proposal a moment of genuine strategic courage, or is he walking us toward a war nobody has a plan to finish?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be absolutely clear about what we're dealing with here. Iran is not a rational actor in the Western diplomatic sense. It is a revolutionary theocracy that has been in a declared state of war with the United States since 1979. They stormed an embassy. They killed American soldiers through proxies in Iraq. They armed the Houthis, who shut down global shipping and cost the world economy an estimated $200 billion in rerouting costs alone. And the response from Washington for decades? Appeasement with a diplomatic bow on top. Douglas Murray has said it plainly. The West's greatest strategic error has been the failure to impose genuine consequences, and he is absolutely right. Trump's rejection of this latest proposal isn't recklessness. It's the first coherent signal Washington has sent in years that there is actually a bottom line. And here's the uncomfortable thing the foreign policy establishment won't tell you. The IAEA has confirmed Iran is enriching uranium to 84% purity. Weapons grade is 90. They are one technical sprint from a nuclear device. You don't negotiate your way out of that from a position of weakness.
But Marcus, isn't there a real danger that Trump's "they haven't paid a big enough price" language is exactly the kind of provocation that gives Iran's hardliners domestic political cover to refuse any deal at all? And Sophia, what's your take? Is the economic pressure actually working? Or are we past the point where sanctions alone change Iranian behavior?
Well, look, I think Marcus is completely right on the threat, but I think he's underselling how complicated the economic picture actually is here. Here's the data that matters. When genuine maximum pressure sanctions were applied during the Obama era, Iran's oil exports fell by roughly 60%, and that is what brought them to the table for the original JCPOA. The economic lever works when it's applied properly and consistently. My concern isn't Trump's rejection of this proposal. My concern is whether Washington has the institutional discipline to maintain a coherent economic pressure campaign without leaking concessions every 6 weeks. Biden's team spent 3 years essentially telegraphing to Tehran that America desperately wanted a deal. And when you tell your adversary you desperately want something, you've already lost the negotiation. The real question isn't military options versus diplomacy. It's whether the American government can execute a sustained, disciplined economic strategy without the foreign policy blob undermining it from within.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely at this stage. We are not in a sanctions versus negotiation timeline anymore. The IAEA timeline says Iran could achieve nuclear breakout in weeks if they chose to sprint. Weeks. No sanctions regime operates on that timescale. And let me tell you what's really going on. National Review has documented the Red-Green Alliance operating inside America, the convergence of hard-left networks and Islamist sympathizers who have spent years creating domestic political constraints on any administration that wants to take a hard line. That's not a fringe concern. That is a structural problem inside American civic life. Iran knows it. They factor it into their calculations. Every time a protest erupts on an American campus demanding no military action, Tehran's hardliners get a data point that tells them American resolve is softer than its rhetoric. The economic argument is fine in theory, but Iran has demonstrated it will absorb enormous economic pain to preserve its nuclear program because that program is theological, not transactional.
Here's what I want to know, and I want both of you to be honest about this. Are we genuinely 6 months away from either a military strike or a nuclear-armed Iran? Because those seem like the only two destinations on this road right now. Sophia, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 3 plausible trajectories, and none of them are comfortable. If Trump holds firm and the economic pressure is maintained with genuine discipline, not the half-hearted version, there's a real historical precedent for Iran negotiating seriously when the pain becomes unbearable. That's scenario 1, and it's not impossible. Scenario 2 is that negotiations drag on indefinitely in that twilight zone of half measures. Iran's program keeps advancing quietly, and by the time Washington acts decisively, the window has closed. That's the trajectory I'm most worried about right now, because it's the path of least political resistance. If current trends continue, where rhetoric is tough but the diplomatic process drags, Iran crosses that threshold while everyone is still talking.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario that keeps serious security analysts awake at night. Israel is watching this clock, and Israel will not wait for American consensus to form. Israel's entire strategic doctrine since its founding has been that it cannot afford to absorb a first strike. If they calculate that Iran is weeks from breakout and Washington is still in negotiation mode, the trajectory suggests Israel acts unilaterally. And the moment Israel strikes Iranian nuclear facilities, Every Iranian proxy from Hezbollah to the Houthis to the Shia militias in Iraq activates simultaneously. America gets dragged into a multi-front conflict, whether it chose to be there or not, without a clear objective, without an exit architecture, and with a foreign policy establishment that will immediately start screaming that it's all Trump's fault. That is the real risk here. Not a war America chooses. A war America stumbles into because it delayed too long.
Two of the sharpest minds on this program, and neither of you is offering me a comfortable answer, which probably means you're both right. Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, thank you. One thing's certain, somewhere in Tehran tonight, someone is deciding whether America has finally grown its spine back, and the entire world is riding on that answer. Two U.S. service members are missing in southwestern Morocco after taking part in the African Lion military exercise, one of the largest American military drills on the African continent. AFRICOM confirmed the disappearance on Sunday, saying a search and rescue operation is underway near the city of Tantan, involving U.S. forces, Moroccan military, and other participating nations. We know very little beyond that, and in a sense, that information vacuum is itself part of the story. The stakes here are human, strategic, and institutional, and the answers that emerge from this search will matter far beyond Morocco's borders. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is this a story about individual tragedy, or does it signal something deeper about how America manages its military commitments in Africa?
Thanks, Emma. Look, it's both. And the moment you separate those two things, you've already failed the men and women in uniform. What we have here is two American service members, trained professionals, participants in a structured multinational exercise with AFRICOM, who are now missing in southwestern Morocco, near a geographically and politically complex stretch of North Africa. That alone demands full transparency and sustained institutional accountability. But the broader signal matters enormously. AFRICOM's mission in Africa is not peripheral. It is central to Western strategic competition with Russia and China on a continent that is actively being contested right now. Wagner Group rebranded forces are embedded in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. China has a military base in Djibouti. The Sahel is fracturing. And Morocco, a stable, pragmatic, pro-Western partner, is exactly the kind of ally America needs to be strengthening, not embarrassing through poor crisis communication. Douglas Murray has argued for years that the West's civilizational problem is a failure of confident self-assertion. And I'd argue this moment is a test of that. Does America handle this with the seriousness it deserves, or does it quietly manage the story into irrelevance?
But Sophia, isn't there a risk you're over-strategizing what might simply be a tragic training accident? Two people are missing. Shouldn't the human story come first before we start drawing geopolitical maps? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Sophia's instincts are right directionally, but I think she's getting slightly ahead of the facts, and that matters. Here's what I think is important. We don't actually know what happened near Tantan. The terrain in southwestern Morocco near the western Sahara border is genuinely difficult. Atlantic coastline, arid inland zones, complex geography. The first job right now is to find these service members alive. Full stop. But here's the data point that should concern everyone watching this. AFRICOM oversees security cooperation across 54 African nations. That is an enormous operational footprint with real physical risk to real human beings. And when something goes wrong, the Pentagon's historical instinct is information management first, accountability second. We've seen it before. What I want to know, what the families want to know, is whether the exercise safety protocols were adequate for the specific conditions near Tantan, and whether the command chain responded with the right speed when these individuals were reported missing on Saturday.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Of course, we want them found alive, that goes without saying. But you can hold the human urgency and the strategic stakes simultaneously. That's not over-strategizing. That's clear thinking. And here's what I won't let slide. The media coverage of this story has been minimal, perfunctory. The BBC ran a brief, Al Jazeera covered it, The Guardian put out a few paragraphs, and then nothing, no follow-up, no investigation of protocols, no sustained pressure on AFRICOM to explain itself. 2 American warriors are missing. If this were a story that could be used to undermine American military legitimacy abroad, we'd have wall-to-wall coverage. We know we would. Ben Shapiro has made this point repeatedly. The media's relationship with military sacrifice is deeply selective. The silence here is telling.
Here's what I want to know. The area near Tantan borders the disputed Western Sahara region, one of Africa's longest-running territorial conflicts. Does the geopolitical complexity of that region change the nature of this incident, or are we reading too much into the geography? James, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 3 tracks. Best case, they're found alive. AFRICOM explains the circumstances transparently, and the lessons learned process within the command actually produces protocol improvements. That's the outcome we're all hoping for. Second track, if this ends badly, the trajectory suggests a period of intense congressional scrutiny on AFRICOM's exercise safety standards. That scrutiny is warranted and should happen regardless of outcome. The third track, and I want to be careful here because we're working with very limited facts, is that the Western Sahara adjacency adds a layer of political complexity that could complicate the narrative if the circumstances of the disappearance turn out to be more than a straightforward training incident. I'm not speculating about what happened. I'm saying the geopolitical context means the stakes of full transparency are higher than they would be elsewhere.
Here's what concerns me most. The risk is institutional complacency. Even if these service members are found safely, which I genuinely hope for with everything, the pattern we've seen from the Pentagon and from AFRICOM in past incidents is that information gets tightly controlled, families get managed rather than informed, and the lessons learned process becomes an internal bureaucratic exercise rather than genuine accountability. History tells us that military institutions under pressure prioritize reputation before reckoning. And Morocco is too important a partner, strategically, diplomatically, in terms of African Lion's entire purpose, for this incident to be handled poorly. If AFRICOM fumbles the transparency piece, the ripple effects for U.S.-Morocco relations and for the credibility of America's entire African security partnership framework could be significant and lasting.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, thank you both. The search continues near Tantan tonight, and the answers AFRICOM owes those families are not optional. One thing is certain. Somewhere in Washington's command structure, someone is very aware that how this story ends is entirely within their control to handle with either honor or bureaucratic cowardice.
That's all for this update. Stay informed and stay connected. I'm Emma. We'll be back shortly.